Welcome back to Following Noadon, a Stormlight podcast. This week is episode 60. We are in the 60th episode, and we are an Oathbringer. We are doing chapters 17 through 20, and we have some Kaladin point of view to go through this week. Got a little bit of Shallan and Dalinar, I believe. Paul, how are you feeling?
I'm feeling good. I hope you do more than believe because you're the one who's supposed to guide us, Trevor.
I,
Um,
I'm prepared. Don't worry. I double
okay,
guessed
okay.
myself.
Fair. I'm doing great. I'm excited, as always, to talk about Oathbringer. And we get some really cool details this week that I'm excited to dive into.
Elliot?
Same. I'm starting to get really intrigued with where our story is going and what our characters are having to deal with. So some good questions this week for sure.
Good. Paul, do you have 2 words to summarize this episode?
I do. So my biggest word, or the first word that came to my mind is toxicity, and my second word is prideful. So not very
Okay.
kind words, but toxicity and prideful.
Pretty critical words. Elliot?
I went down a similar road, but perhaps a little more playful. My 2 words are casual drinking.
Casual drinking. All right. With these 2 words, let's talk about Oathbringer. Alrighty. Casual drinking, toxicity. What was your second one, Paul?
Prideful.
Prideful. All right. So some negative attributes this week for I'm assuming they're going to be applied to to our main characters. Do you guys want to confirm or deny this? Paul, we'll start with you.
I will neither confirm nor deny. No, I'm kidding. My words, I feel like I usually single out one of our characters this week. I really don't have anyone to single out specifically. I think toxicity applies pretty hands-on to all of our main characters, not all of them. Um, it came to my mind mostly because
How
of
dare you talk about
Shallan's.
Kaladin that way?
Yeah, but it mostly came to be because of Shallan's casual drinking, right? But also a lot of the stuff with Dalinar's flashback, and it looks like he was a rather toxic individual. So those are the main reasons. And then prideful also went along with those two characters as well. Specifically, we see a lot of confidence, but not necessarily a good type of confidence with Dalinar's flashbacks, as well as Shallan's drinking scene. It's just a lot of wild behavior, justifiable or not, we can discuss. Um, but yeah, a lot of toxic behavior and a lot of confidence to go with it.
Okay. Elliot?
I'm intrigued now to start talking about these chapters because I don't think I would have thrown Kaladin in that same bucket there, but I was intending my words to apply mainly to Shallan with her episodes of casual drinking and some probably not so productive explorations of alcohol there, but also especially the casual portion of it. I wanted that to apply to Dalinar and the pretty hilarious scene where he goes and just casually strolls through a high storm, nothing's happening, just out for a walk. It was pretty great.
Of course.
All right. Before we get too far into this episode, we have a spell check. I don't know when the last time we had a spell check was, but here we are. We've met some new characters, or at least Kaladin has, and we'll go for the male Parshmen who he has a conversation with later in chapter 20, but briefly in chapter 17. Um, Elliot, we'll start with you, as we always do for these.
I found who you're referring to on this one. It seems simple. I think Kaladin even mentions in one of these chapters about how they all seem to have fairly simple names, but I think the guy he's talking to there is Sa, the British pronunciation of sir, like yes sir kind of thing.
Quality, yes. Okay, that is how they say it in the audiobook. Paul, how would you like to spell Sa?
Okay, I went with the most simple way I could, even though I didn't want to. I just went with SAH for Sa.
You are correct. Sa
Okay.
is SAH. It's
I
fairly.
really wanted to do like a Zeth moment and do like a SZ or something. But went back on that at the last second. So Sa. Yes, Sa.
All right, and our second Parshman or Parshwoman, I guess, Eliot.
I believe her name is also just kind of going for simple, just Ken.
Paul.
They definitely say it as Ken or Ken, I think. I may have written this too much, but I went with a KHEN. BKEN.
Brilliant.
That is
KHEN.
that is correct. He kind of has some phlegm going on when he says Ken, like Ken. I can't do it, but
it's almost a cough, but
Yes.
it doesn't sound like that at all. But I'm just speculating.
And then there's the 7-year-old girl Parshman. According to the wiki, her name is Vi, VAI, and we've been introduced to her, but I don't remember if her name is mentioned in the chapter or not. I might have spoiled that for you. Sorry. I apologize.
Whoa. Can we get a new guide in here? Can we get a new leader? Someone come help us. He's not going to spoil.
Vote of no confidence.
Yeah. Can my vote count twice? Because I've read this book. Dang it. Okay. I was just hoping to tie the vote. Alrighty. So, our Kaladin chapters. We left Kaladin. He got intentionally captured, more or less, by Parshmen. He didn't intend to get spotted by this yellow Spren that spots him, but he did intentionally give himself up. And we pick up with him here in chapter 17. And bless his heart, he's really starting to commiserate with these Parshmen way more than he feels comfortable with. And they actually seem to be fairly open to him as well. Like, obviously they're frustrated with what's happened to them, and as they talk back and forth about what's happened to their minds and how that's comparable to what Kaladin was in, how it's not comparable. There's a fairly friendly discourse here between Kaladin and Sa, but there's a very clear division, like a dividing line that Sa makes very clear to him. I think it's in chapter 20, and how they're not comparable and at the same time. So what did you guys think of? We're getting to know a Parshman besides Shen, or Relaine, I guess we should call him. So what were you guys' thoughts?
This was interesting. I really enjoyed this conversation. It's not that it's enjoyable. It is not a very fun conversation, but it gave a lot of perspective that I hadn't seen before. Even though we had some dialogue with Relaine, I think this really put into perspective that the Parshmen weren't just enslaved. They were kind of like robbed of their entire livelihood or their like mental functionality, which is a total different ballgame. And I thought really, like, going into it, I thought Kaladin was going to be able to kind of break through to them in that he had this shared experience of being a slave. But it was not the case at all. And I think that was really good and honestly put into perspective how big of a deal the Parshmen being dull form or Parshmen really is that I never really thought about. So I thought it was really impactful. It kind of hit me a lot.
Yeah, I completely agree. I thought this chapter gave us a lot of insight into exactly what we're dealing with here as these Parshmen. Are they the I still don't know if I can quite answer the question of are they the exact same as the Parshendi or are they not? Like I'm not 100% sure yet there, but it definitely seems clear that these are not warriors. These are not demons. These are not, it's not the and wreck the world kind of people. They seem just more like refugees or these people that have just been downtrodden their whole lives and now they've been given an awakening and they get to express themselves for the first time. And so this definitely shifts my perspective on who we're dealing with. Who it seems like it does Kaladin as well, I think, through these two chapters here.
It gives better context for our previous couple chapters as well, as when Kaladin's
Yeah.
when Kaladin approaches Hearthstone and says, how many of them, or how many people died at the hand of the Voidbringers? And they're like, well, they didn't really attack us, they just left, and it was the Everstorm that really did the damage. And then when he's going around in the villages, they're like, oh, they just attacked our grain storage, they didn't really hurt anybody, and the people they did hurt, they deliberately didn't kill. So there's a lot of humanity, for lack of a better term, behind the Parshmen.
Yeah, it's kind of rough. There isn't a better term because I feel like that was Saw's big problem.
Right.
Is that they have to be compared to humanity and stuff, right? But yeah, no, it was really good perspective. I hadn't really thought of it until you mentioned it, kind of. Like, are Parshmen and Parshendi the same? And this was the first time that I really thought maybe they are different. I don't think this is the right comparison, but it seems like there may be something kind of like can we have dark eyes and light eyes? And maybe like the Parshmen
Yeah.
are like the dark eyes almost, and the Parshendi are like the light eyes. Because our Parshmen have only known this like dull form and been very like kind of pacifist or just peaceful people. And our Parshendi have had these forms and they, I don't know, seem more in the loop or just like, just higher on the social ladder almost. I mean, the Parshmen were quite literally the bottom of any kind of social ladder we've seen. So maybe that's not a fair comparison, but that was something I thought of, which I'm not thinking of too strongly, but there could be a difference there where these people really have no interest or no ambition to fight or anything like that.
So, taking your comparison there, are you making the argument that light eyes operate on a higher plane of like mental existence than dark eyes? Are you dark-eyest as most Alethi are?
No, that's not what I'm saying. And also, like, there's lots of things I've thought of that just make it not true. Like, dark eyes do fight, like, they're usually soldiers, right? And stuff like that. But just kind of that there's, I guess, a difference that's like outside of a shard blade, not really like surpassable, maybe, or like overcomable. I don't know if our Parshmen can change forms. I'm assuming they can, but maybe they just choose not to or don't feel a need to.
So
That was a
so
poor
that's where I'm trying
comparison.
to figure this out is with the forms. I'm trying to figure out what form are these Parshmen in now? Is it a form that we're familiar with, like work form or war form or something like that? And if they do have the same forms, that would kind of push me down the lines of okay, we're talking about the same types of beings here. But if they have like different categories of forms or something like that, or they're limited in the number of forms they can take, yeah, maybe we're talking about some sort of subclass of they call themselves the listeners. Like, do they have like different subspecies amongst that? Yeah, I'm not sure yet.
Kind of related. We've seen our Stormlight versus our what we've considered. Well, let me start here. We've seen our high storm versus our Everstorm, and we've maybe started to see some Stormlight versus whatever else you want to call it. We've had a couple thoughts on whatever the opposite of Stormlight is. I want to take this down a bunny trail here for a second. Everything that's tied to Stormlight and the Knights Radiant. What do we have? We have Spren. We have Shard Blades. Shard Plate, maybe? Rashadium, maybe? We've got Surge Bindings. Anything else?
Yeah, I was thinking of just like the Knights Radiant as a whole. The Heralds, if you want to count them, maybe.
So how much is entailed with this Everstorm? What else is coming with this Everstorm? Any guesses? Any thoughts here?
I think we mentioned this before. In one of our very first or early Dalinar flashbacks, he has to fight these creatures that seem to be not of this world and seem to remember they had some sort of shadowy essence to them, black smoke or something like poured out from them. But I'm wondering if the Everstorm is going to bring creatures of that sort. Are we going to start to see beings that aren't normally around, or maybe are associated with the desolations that could perhaps be in that category? Maybe.
It very well could be. One thing I'm just remembering also is the Parshendi. Okay, we know they have one shard blade. We know Eshonai has a shard blade, right?
Yes.
So they could just kind of be the opposite of a normal shard bearer or a normal shard blade, and then I don't know. We've gotten a little bit of info with that, but just kind of the concept that there's going to be like, if not an exact opposite, or just kind of like an equal threat on the evil side, could very well be. And yeah, like you were saying, Elliot, the Midnight Essence that we saw a long time ago, there's kind of no telling what kind of stuff there could be.
I feel like maybe the key to figuring this out is going to be the Spren. We're seeing a new Spren fighting these Parshmen, and it's described similarly to Syl, right? It's a
ribbon of
yellowy,
light.
Yeah, ribbon of light, almost like the opposite of a wind Spren or something like that. And we don't even know anything about it yet to even draw, conclusions about, what this kind of Spren is. But I really want to know, because this seems to be perhaps a source of part of the reason why. Like what are these Parshmen trying to do? What is their goal now that they've awakened? I think the Spren seems to be leading them, and maybe that's our source of figuring that out.
I think you're right. I am really grateful for. So also, I don't know, maybe I did a poor job of explaining it earlier, but I was not including Kaladin in my little words of toxicity and things earlier.
I know you weren't. I was just
Yeah.
making a joke.
Trevor causing trouble again. Anyways, I'm really glad that Kaladin is in this situation. Like, very glad. It's probably what I'm most interested in right now, because he's going to give us a lot of information that we could really see. Something I've thought about a little bit. I guess this is my little. I say little as if this isn't a big deal. My prediction for what's going to happen, but just the whole premise of kind of what we have going on, this war and this division, and Dalinar's character, especially since this is Dalinar's book. I'm gonna guess that the whole premise is just gonna be to unite not only the people of Alethkar, but the Parshendi too. Like literally everyone in this world. That's a very big, lofty goal, and if that happens, it's gonna happen at the end of like the 5th book or something. But I think it's very possible. I think it may end up being something where like everyone unites against these like evil Spren or something
Okay.
like that. I feel like we really still haven't seen our like big ultimate bad. It's kind of a shadow or a mystery right now. We know of these like 9 shadows,
Unmade.
The unmade, but we don't fully know anything about that. But I'm gonna guess that just our Parshmen, especially seeing how inherently peaceful our Parshmen are, that they're kind of being puppeteered. We know that already with the storm form. We've seen that it takes away a lot of the rational thinking, but I'm going to be really optimistic and hope that everyone unites and we have a happy ever after against these evil Spren, and then
Sounds good.
It,
You're right. Unite them is very vague.
Mm-hmm. Because the plan right now is to
and to jump
unite Alethkar, but I think it may go bigger than that. But yes, sorry.
No problem. I was just going to jump in there and add that I agree. Unite them is vague, and I think a big question Dalinar is going to have to tackle here is how. We're getting this parallel of his past where they were uniting Alethkar just through a very violent means, and so is Dalinar going to have to resort to that kind of uniting of the entirety of Roshar, or can he do it through peaceful diplomatic means? Maybe that's going to be his big dilemma.
Any more thoughts on Kaladin and his adventure with the Parshmen here, or shall we move on? Actually, I have one. I just really want to highlight how quickly the I brought this up a little bit earlier, but how quickly the Parshmen are open to conversation here. Kaladin summons Syl as a shard blade, cuts his own ties, and then they're like totally fine with it. Like they don't they're still, I mean they're not, but the next chapter they're still having a conversation with him, and he's just proving that he can help them and he wants to help them. And they're very quick to accept his help. What are your guys' thoughts on this as you're reading it for the first time? That they're kind of just chill with it. When Kaladin shows up and it's like, hey, I can help you, they're like, okay. And they don't even really think about it. I feel like.
Yeah, I want to make sure I get it straight. Doesn't he? I don't think they know he has a shard blade. Doesn't he? He uses Syl as like a little knife to cut his rope,
Right.
and then goes over there and smashes a rock button and is like, actually, you should do this. Here's some dry wood, and we can, if you have my tinder bag, we can get a fire going, right?
Right.
And they're like, cool. Just on that in general, it seems like they're open to suggestions because I think they're a little bit lost at the moment. Believe, is it Sa who gets a little upset just talking with Kaladin because he's like,
Yeah.
I shouldn't need you, like he doesn't want to talk to him, but almost feels like he needs the help or wants the help is the advice is actually like useful and helpful. But yeah, you have a point. They don't just like silence. Or I feel like if my hostage broke out, I would be like, okay, like
Right. Like
we've got to do something more serious about this, right? We can't just have him breaking out all the time. So yeah, that's something I didn't think of. It just kind of glanced over that. It's like, yeah, They're friends now. Yeah.
I think my take on it was they seem very childlike. They're just very, oh, you're gonna help us. We're not thrilled with that, but sure, yeah, let's do it. They just seem a bit naive, maybe, like they've just been created almost. It's not only have they just awakened, they seem very sort of coming to grips with the world, very naive. That was my kind of take on it.
Yeah, that's fair. They could have just assumed like, oh, I don't know how to tie a knot, I guess, even though I thought I did. And they could have just accepted that. But alrighty. Chapter 18, we have Shallan, or more specifically Vale, going back to our separate personas, which Paul, you're such a big fan of.
I must say it's mostly my complaints are with Brightness Radiant.
Okay.
That's our character's name. Vale has been around. Vale is fine. It seems like a fitting thing. It serves a purpose. So, anyways,
Vale certainly does serve a purpose, but Eliot, you have something here on the outline that's very interesting here. I feel like there's a clearer line between Vale and Shallan and Brightness Radiant, where Brightness Radiant is kind of just a better version of Shallan in Shallan's eyes. Like, I don't really want to say that, but that's how she views it, so that's how I'm going to say it. But Vale is a completely different person. So, Eliot, you have something on the outline here that could argue the other side of that from Shallan's perspective. I don't know if you really want to tie that in, but go ahead.
Are you referring to my quote? Is it the?
I am, yeah.
So I picked up an interesting thing in this chapter because Pattern and Shallan have a quick interchange moment that caught me as, oh boy, this could be big. Shallan is thinking about, I think she's actually talking with Maraise at this point, but she says she's thinking about her brothers, and she's worried for a second that she fabricated her memories of them. And Pattern jumps in and is like, hang on a second, that isn't the lie. Can't you tell? And then Shallan kind of snaps out of it and they move on as if nothing happened. But I was definitely, as I was reading, I was like, well, hold on, hang on a second. If Shallan gets so far into this multiple roles thing and different, illusions and different, strings of lies that she's telling, is she going to forget what's real? Is that going to be a battle she's going to have to fight? Is that a pit she's going to start to fall into where she can't even remember what's real and what's not? That could be really bad. Losing your identity really bad. So that scared me, that little section.
Yeah, she's so caught up in the role of Vale and Brightness Radiant and Shallan and trying to balance all of that. And she has this identity crisis of, wait, did I make up Shallan? Did I make up my entire backstory?
Right.
Who am I? And so there's the lines aren't as clear as one might think between Shallan and Vale here.
I think it is pretty safe to say that Shallan is a method actor or actress. She goes pretty hard for this. I'm curious to hear Eliot's thoughts a little bit just in this. I hope I'm not leaving that topic too soon or anything. And it's still on the same topic, but just Shallan's means of finding her answers in this series of chapters here. Not necessarily that she's kind of making a scene at all these bars, trying to find info, but I feel like she's getting carried away and kind of just she is actively building a reputation for Vale to kind of like be tough and not be messed with, which I think serves a great purpose. Like that makes sense. Um, but also, I was just kind of curious to get your thoughts, Elliot, on this as a whole, because I feel like there could have been a much better plan, and this was kind of just a I'm gonna be really drastic about everything. Um, from Shallan or Vale
Yeah.
here.
Yeah, your comment about her acting is a good one. I think you're right. She's getting very in character here. She's thinking about what would Vale do, and then she just goes and does it and doesn't really think about necessarily whether it's the responsible thing to do or the best way to tackle this. She's just, I'm Vale, so I'm gonna go be drunk and see who I can, talk into giving me information because that's what Vale would do. And it kind of makes me think like that's a good way perhaps for her to get information. It's a good way for her to build up her character of Vale and give Vale some good, you know, authenticity and believability, but she can go too far down the rabbit hole if she's not careful. She might get one lost in the whole Vale thing, but two, if she starts to try and, balance three, four, five, six different characters that she's all, developing all at the same time. Like the amount of mental effort it's going to take for her to keep all the lies straight, as Pattern, I'm sure, would tell it. Like that's going to come back to bite her for sure. I wonder if if she's going to be able to do that if she keeps doing this. Can she keep the two different?
Yeah. I also, so this may just be me thinking too realistically, right? This is our fantasy, not, storyline.
Yeah.
There's lots of things in this world that don't completely make sense, right? Like in our real world application, right?
Yeah.
But one of my thoughts was also just she's going so far into this character Vale, like into making Vale extreme, that I feel like it's hurting her credibility of Vale's reputation. I'm thinking of it mostly with like drinking all the like Horneater White and stuff. I don't know fully what the like comparison between that and whatever the other one is, right? But I feel like it makes it too unbelievable for like a normal person on Roshar. This is me being very picky. But I feel like that was almost a little bit too extreme, that it's like no one's gonna believe that someone like did that. Albeit, I will say though, using the Ghost Bloods like emblem there does kind of make it work, because to maybe other people they're like it's this ambiguous. Oh, the Ghost Bloods are super mysterious and sneaky and powerful or whatever, and like if you know what I'm talking about there. But I don't know. I felt like it was a little too far, but also I enjoyed these chapters, honestly. I feel like this isn't a complaint. I'm just kind of playing devil's advocate with Vale here, and
So,
her methods.
as a first time reader, I remember thinking that Shallan's way in over her head here. That she asks for colored wine first of all, which is strike one, and then she asks for the hardest stuff they've got, and they give her moonshine basically, and and she like can't breathe or whatever, and then burns it off with a little stormlight, and then what was I going with? Oh, and so I was thinking, well, she's just gonna ruin her reputation before she makes a good one, or a good whatever tough exterior one. But I also thought about that at the same time of, well, if she does make a fool of herself, she can just try again the next night with somebody else, right? She could just paint a new face and go again. So
you do have a good point.
So might as well, go for it. And
that's true.
That's a good point. You would think though that she'd need to do the practicing with a new alias and not burn the identity she's worked so hard on by going out getting, all this crazy stuff like stabbing thugs and whatnot with her main alias. But yeah, this is turning into quite the undercover spy operation for Shallan.
As far as what she's there to do, Did you guys have any thoughts on this another murder that she's investigating here? What she's actually in theory there to do instead of just drink wine?
I am a little bit curious about this because, like, as the reader, we know Adolin murdered Sadius, right?
Right.
And so these other murders are like separate, and it's weird because aren't they trying to like link this to Sadius's death? Like,
Yes.
there's a murderer about who's going around killing people, right? And so I'm a little confused. It's either like an odd coincidence, or I mean, it's good for Adolin because it's like if they find this guy, then they can try to pin Sadius's death on him. But I'm a little curious or worried almost that, like, what if it's someone who's important, or like what if, I don't know, we don't know. I feel like this is going to turn out to be a bigger storyline thing or bigger situation than just like, oh, there's a like some rogue no name murderer, you know. So there's just a lot of hidden potential, I guess. So I'm curious to
Yeah,
see where it goes.
I completely agree with you, Paul. And and the information that Shallan digs up changes the game for me on this, because at first we were just thinking that, hey, Sadius got killed. We know who did that. Another person gets killed in exactly the same way. That seems to hint at someone's like trying to get it pinned on Adolin, or someone's trying to, you know, do something specific in the whole Dalinar versus Sadius conflict. But then here in the back alleys and bars of Urithiru, we now have a fairly random murder, and that these thugs take out somebody, and then someone comes along and copycats that same murder. Like, that seems, yeah, completely unrelated. It seems like there's someone there copycatting murders for the sake of copycatting murders. Like, that's completely different and much stranger, actually.
Can you elaborate on which murders you're talking about for the back alley
In
one?
this chapter, right? So in this chapter, we learn that there was, I don't remember all the details, some drunk guy who killed his wife, right?
Right.
And so then the later on we learn that a barmaid got murdered, killed the same way, like exact same way, right?
Right.
Wasn't that how?
Yep.
So that's the copycat death I'm referring to, which, yeah, maybe could be a coincidence. The fact that Shallan is hearing about it, and just for the fact that we're reading about it, we probably wouldn't be reading about it if it wasn't of importance. So, yeah, strange.
Yeah, I just wanted to make sure that you did catch that before I gave it away, that yes, there's
Yeah.
a drunk thug guy who murders his wife, and then there is a second murder of some young barmaid behind a tavern of the exact same method that he killed his wife on. So Elliot, you have a bullet point here that says wine is just a general term for alcohol on Roshar, and we have a couple of these that Brandon Sanderson has put in here. Wine is one of them. Chickens
Yep.
is another. Minks is another. I think there's one more, but it's just Brandon Sanderson's been asked about this, and he says he just thinks it's funny that there are some, like, when you're a young kid, you just substitute words for other words in your head, and that's how you equate them. So just for, like, sake of an example, instead of the word meat, you just use the word, chicken, because that's
Yep.
the most common meat for you. So you're just going to call everything chicken. What kind of chicken are we having tonight? So what kind of wine are we having tonight? That's just his.
Yeah.
this one had me confused. I'm reading this whole chapter, and I'm thinking like, on a second, they're clearly talking about like vodka and
Like liquors, yeah.
liquor, moonshine kind of alcohol, but they're calling it wine. And I just kind of realized about halfway through, I'm like, oh, okay, I get it. Wine is just a general reference to alcohol, and I can't believe we're 2.25 books into the series, and this is the first time I'm realizing this, that when they say wine, they're just talking about alcohol in general. But they also they say beer. So
They
there's
do.
obviously beer is something specific or separate, but yeah, wine seems to be way more than what like you and I might think of as wine. It was interesting.
And I don't know if this is 100% accurate, but I'm fairly certain that the different colored wines that the light eyes have are different alcohols, because the whatever wine that the Kholinar men, Dalinar's men are supposed to stick to not get drunk and not have alcohol, it's just fruit juice. So and they have a specific color for that, and then there's like purple and orange and all that fun stuff. So those are supposed to, I'm fairly certain those are supposed to be different alcohols entirely, as opposed to just different wines.
And that hit me too as I was reading this. I'd always just assumed those were like the different types of wine, like Merlot and whatever else is out there. But I'm with you. It seems like we're now talking about different alcohol levels, up from your for light spritzer all the way up to whiskey and who knows what else.
Yeah, I don't actually remember the color like order, but it definitely talks about it at some point. If I had to guess, I'd say that orange is like the second hardest or something like that, and then maybe violet is the strongest.
I think you're correct. Yeah.
I remember in one of our chapters, Dalinar talks about violet wine or something.
I bet somebody out there can tell us. Somebody jump in the
Yeah.
comments and tell us what the hierarchy of
yeah,
of Alethi wines is in colors.
yeah. That was something that new that I learned though from this chapter, is just that for non like for dark eyed bars, or just the place that Shallan is at, they don't color it. I thought it was just everything was colored, but I guess the colors are just something that the light eyes add, just for aesthetic pleasure, I guess, to make it look nice. But I didn't know that. That's not an important detail. But the barb keep there at one of the places Shalom goes is like, what do you mean you need orange? Like, this is orange. It's just literally not orange. It's just not colored orange. Yeah, it's the same stuff. But
Paul, you mentioned Dalinar a second ago, and your or I guess Elliot's words were casual drinking. So do you guys want to move on to chapter 19, where we have an interesting exchange of old Dalinar and his brother and Sadius, and ELA's there too?
Do it.
this is interesting. I want to kick it off a little bit, just kind of on the notion of, I think it's really neat whenever we get to see a little bit of Gavilar dialogue in these flashback chapters. Most notably here, it feels like Gavilar in the flashback chapters is just current day Dalinar. Just about where it's like, okay, let's honor these codes. Like, let me tell you, do you have a moment to talk about the way of kings?
Our Lord and Savior
yeah.
Noadon? Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Because Dalinar is definitely, he's the Blackthorn here. He's very gruff. Part of my words, toxicity and prideful, were because of this. He's just loud and rash and just everything. And Gavilar is like, all right, Dalinar, like, let me tell you about this book you should read, and just all this stuff, and like, let's talk about the honor codes of old and all this stuff, right? And it just very much sounds like current day Dalinar, where he's focused on honor and things, and let's try and like restore, this sense of well being that may have used to been, um, which I thought was pretty interesting. Um,
I want to jump in there if I'm not interrupting you too much, Paul, because I noticed what you're saying, but this was the first time I did notice that. It seemed to me in the previous flashbacks that was not the case. That Gavilar was very much on the Sadeas and Dalinar boat of, roll in, kill as many as we can, the rest won't dare resist us kind of approach. But here in this scene, it seems like Gavilar has changed a little bit. He is talking about, hey, actually, by the way, why are we doing all this? What are we doing all this for? Let's talk about, what the end goal is here. And Dalinar's like, nope, just point me at the, next enemy. Don't want to talk about it. But it makes me wonder, like, why? What's making Gavilar change? Why? What's causing him to think differently about this? Is it just, he found a book, he found Way of Kings, and now he's reading it. It's like, oh, light bulb. Or is there someone else that's like an influence on him, or did something happen that's causing Gavilar to like question some of this? I'm curious now why Gavilar is dabbling, I guess, in Noadon or whatever else it is.
I see what you mean, and you're probably right about Gavilar. I guess Gavilar as a whole, I have the picture of him when we heard about him in the first book, which is very much he was interested in the Way of Kings,
Yep,
and all the stuff, and that was kind of his focus, which was much more modern than I guess whenever we first started seeing these flashbacks. So I'm guessing we'll see some of that development. But whenever I think of Gavilar, that's who I think of, was the one who was
right.
like, let's honor these war codes and stuff like that, and we can see how Dalinar's kind of picked that up from him over time. But I guess I still kind of have that picture of him like that, and I didn't think of him as being like one of the rough guys from before. So
You both are 100% correct that Gavilar started this book, Oathbringer, in our flashback chapters as, dare I say, a tyrant going across Alethkar, trying to, unite everybody under him, and using his brother and his armies to do so. And then in this chapter, we're closer to, why are we doing this? Let's talk about the philosophy here, the Sunmaker. Why did he fail? That type of thing. And Paul, you started this off with, it's very interesting to see Gavilar's dialogue, because you can obviously see there's a change starting to happen, what we've seen Dalinar do, and what we've also seen the rest of Alethkar view Dalinar as a weakness as he's headed towards this over the last 3 books. As Dalinar's tried to adapt the Way of Kings into his life, the rest of the High Princes laughed at him, and they weren't really subtle about it either. So do you guys think the same thing's going to be happening for Gavilar as he's trying to unite these High Princes the first time? Or as he's going more towards this maybe classic pacifist leader style in the Way of Kings, as opposed to the tyrant, would he run into the same dilemma here that Dalinar already faced, or that Dalinar will face?
I think it's actually a little bit different from both. I think so Gavilar definitely started, right, we know, as kind of this, like you said, kind of a tyrant, or like you basically take by force, you conquer through force. But what I'm thinking of is kind of the last words that Gavilar said. I don't remember exactly, but doesn't he just tell Dalinar like he must find the most important words a man can say? Or...
Yes, exactly that. I'm so proud of you, Paul. I'm so proud of you.
Thank you. Thank you. 'Cause that stuck with me. That was a very impactful moment. That was in the prologue,
Yes, the
right? In
prologue
the
of
prologue.
The Way of Kings. Yes.
Yes. And so based off of that, and basically that alone, um, at the assumption that Gavilar had something really important that he know needed to be done, but I don't know that he necessarily had a stance of this needs to be done honorably and through, I don't know, uniting. I don't know what his intentions were. It could have just been we need to find these most important words at any cost, I guess. I would like to say that he was doing it with honor because we see his influence on these like codes and the Way of Kings and Know It On and all that stuff. Um, but I don't know that he was just like kind of like this perfect. It's ambiguous. I guess I would like to make the guess that it was kind of just like at whatever cost, whether that's force or I maybe ideally through honor. But end goal is finding these the most important words a man could say, and that's it. Like that's the bottom line that we need to get to.
Can I jump in here real quick?
Mm-hmm.
Tell my brother to find the most important words a man can say. That's what he says to Zeth as he's killing him. So obviously, he thinks this is important enough to tell his assassin as just a far-fetched, maybe Zeth will honor this and tell my brother, which he does. Why? Well, from Gavilar's perspective, actually, I'll ask it a different way. Who else is saying important words?
All of our knights radiant.
Right.
Okay. Does Gavilar, 6 years prior to all of this happening, 7 years, I think, does Gavilar know about these words that are being spoken? Is Gavilar a Knight's Radiant when he dies?
So we must know that he has some kind of relation to this because we do see his conversation with Eshonai, right? And
Right.
we see that he has kind of these big plans to like awaken the old gods or things like that, which I'm just going to go ahead and make the jump that ties into Night Radiant powers at some point, or at a minimum Shard Blades. Um, so probably he at a minimum knew about it or understood it, whether or not he himself was a Night Radiant. We don't know, and maybe wouldn't have made a difference, but
That the prologue of this book gives us a little bit of hints there, but it's almost, as usual, more confusing than it is helpful because remember the same as you, Paul. It seems like Gavilar's a little more keyed into like bringing back the gods of the Parshendi. That was kind of the implication out of that. And so are the words that he's referring to like more aligned with that faction than they are with the Knights Radiant? Is the words most important words a man can say actually not Knights Radiant oath, but something more like a Parshendi, summoning of their gods sort of thing? Like, yeah, I really don't know.
I didn't think we'd be having this conversation this episode, but I'm here
I,
for
d-
it.
I didn't either. I honestly don't even know how we got here. I guess time out Gavilar, but yes, I too, and I think it's got to be it, Elliot. Like I don't know what else it could be right now, other than like these words are some way tied to the Parshendi gods, right? If it's not an awakening, it's a way to maybe if there's some form of Spren like bind them. Like I don't know. There's lots of crazy things that could
Yeah.
be, where you could kind of like wield that power, perhaps.
Because obviously, if Gavilar knew the words, he would have told Szeth to tell Dalinar what they are, right? As opposed to, hey, Dalinar, go find out what the most important words are.
It's true. That is true. Also, just as a note, it changed my perspective a little bit. I thought these final words were actually spoken to Dalinar. I remembered that incorrectly. You're right. He says it to Szeth. But I thought it was like Dalinar finds him, taking his last breath. And he's like, you gotta go find the most important words a man can say, or whatever.
He tells it to Szeth, and Szeth carves it on a piece of the plank that's collapsed next to him. Yeah. And actually, everybody in Alethkar assumes Gavilar did that himself.
Write. Yeah, yes. They assume he can read and write.
Correct. Yeah.
I forgot about those details. Wow.
Regardless, the Gavilar of that night and the Gavilar here seem quite different. They seem like maybe Gavilar's on the path to get there, but Gavilar has a lot more to learn, it seems, than it over however many years this is going to be. On the flip side, Dalinar seems to go in the opposite direction. Like, this is Dalinar, not very honorable, likes to kill people, but we know this is not his low. He's going to get worse. At least that's the implication of, on that night, he's so, out of it and completely drunk that he's completely useless. So, where are the two of them going?
Chapter 19 specifically is a very interesting scene because Dalinar has a very interesting line after the action scene of this scene happens. Sanderson sets up this scene of Dalinar's having a feast with his brother, and he just wants to be at war, but he is not at war, and he's just, he's gonna settle for the politics today because he has to. And he sits down to have some of his pork chop or whatever, and there's no knife. And he's terribly upset about it, that he doesn't even think about it. He just walks out into this high storm to the next tent or to the next building or whatever to ask his, right-hand man, yo, what did I do with my knife? And they'll look at him like, okay, first of all, why are you out in the high storm? Second of all, I have no idea where your knife is. What are you talking about? And then he's like, oh, you're right. My knife is, back in the barracks or whatever. And he just turns around and walks back out. I'll come back to that part shortly. Goes back in, talks with, Sadeas and his brother and stuff. And then there's an assassin trying to kill Gavilar. Does this 360, kicks his brother's stool out from under him so that the knife misses. Decks the assassin, pulls the knife out of thin air and stabs him in the chest. Pulls the knife out of the guy's chest, washes it in his wine, and eats with that knife. And then he thinks to himself, well, at least I washed the knife. I'm not a barbarian. Dude, look what you just did. First of all, you're a boss, and everybody is acknowledging it in the feast room here. Second of all, what on earth are you doing eating with that knife, man? Come on. That's so gross.
Dalinar. No, that was actually why that was part of why I had my words toxicity and prideful. I feel like neither of them 100% matches it, but kind of together they do. It's just yeah, what are you doing eating with that knife? Come on. You're just, I don't know.
It was almost like the entire reason he took out the assassin was just to get the knife. He's like, oh, I need to eat. Here, that. And how dare you try and assassinate Gavilar with that? I need that way more than you do. Give it to me so I can eat my meat with it. What?
Yeah, he's an interesting character in the scene for to say the least. But back to the high storm section, which I said I'd get back to. Do you guys remember what happens right before he goes back in this tent? Elliot, I wonder if you made a note on this, because it's a very
I did.
weird, like, 2 lines of dialogue that maybe I can find it if you want to talk about it for a second. But go ahead.
What I think you're referring to is as he walks back, he sees a huge glowing figure or creature of some kind out in the storm.
Yes,
And
that's what I'm referring
we've
to.
seen these things before, actually. I'm trying to remember where. I think Kaladin saw them when he and Shallan were stuck out on the Shattered Plains, I want to say. They saw a similar creature. I I think we may have even had some oblique references to them in other places, so it didn't surprise me. It was more of a, oh, there's those weird out in the middle of the high storm creatures who are described as like massively huge and really big, kind of glowy. But yeah, in this scene, I think Dalinar just like flips it off and then goes back or whatever he's doing.
Yeah, I have it in front of me here. I should have prepared it, but I have it. A large boulder slammed into the wall, then bounced away. Dalinar glanced and saw something luminous in the distance, a gargantuan figure that moved on spindly, glowing legs. Dalinar stepped back up to the feast hall, gave the whatever it was a rude gesture, then pushed open the door. And that's all it says. And I remember reading that for the first time. I'm like, wait a minute. Like, what? Hold on. First of all, is Dalinar, like, tipsy and doesn't really acknowledge what's happening? Or is he just completely not surprised to see this thing in the high storm? Second, can I get more than one sentence of description of whatever this thing is in the high storm and it's huge and loot? I was upset when I read this the first time. I was like, excuse me?
Like literally just a crumb of detail. Like, can we get a crumb? Can we get a spare crumb of information here? No, I need to confess, I don't remember. I read this chapter twice and I didn't pick up on that, so that's interesting. It sounds so. You pointed out before, I don't remember if it was the cover or backside of the cover of Words of Radiance or Oathbringer, but
It's
you talked
Oathbringer.
about it. And it's those big legs.
Yep.
That we're assuming it belonged to some big creature. So maybe this is a little more foreshadowing to whatever that guy is. Our Mr. Storm Leg Man,
Stormlight Man?
Yeah.
I just wanted to bring this up because I remember reading this for the first time, and it definitely slapped me harder than it did you, Paul, because you didn't remember it, but I read it for the first time and I was like, what?
Hello?
Am I crazy thinking back to Kaladin and Shallan? Didn't Kaladin see something similar?
Yes.
I don't remember that.
Okay.
When they're hiding in the crevice in Words of Radiance, granted, he thinks he sees something out in the high storm, like on the plateau,
Right.
and it's like massive, but there's it's a high storm. Who can tell? It is kind of the vibes you get on that one. This one, Dalinar just sees it and doesn't care at all.
Super casual. Whatever.
So the fact that it was seen kind of more recent day by Kaladin and Shallan makes me more curious. So my once again, with a lot of my thoughts of these things that are kind of dropped in there, I'm like, where's that gonna fit in? Like, our plate is so full. We've got like a second plate, and we've got our whole table is full of questions and problems and things. I'm like, okay, so where do our sleepless fit in? Like, that can't work. Like, we don't have any room for that. And that's almost my thought with this. I'm like, where does this big thing fit in? I almost think it's probably not the same thing, but I think of the thunder clasts or whatever it is from our prelude, just because it's thunder related and this is a high storm.
Mm-hmm.
But Are they a big deal, or are they just kind of big chasm fiends?
So I don't know if
Are they
this
the
is
high storm? Do they
right.
bring the high storm?
I don't know if this is accurate to what, but this is what my mind is on the scale of, where I think of Thunderclass on the scale of like a chasm fiend, like maybe 150 feet high, and it's big, but in my mind's eye, this thing is like massive, like skyscraper height type massive. I don't know if that's accurate, but that's what my mental picture is just way bigger than a chasm fiend. Whereas I have Thunderclass as more of a chasm fiend scale.
Maybe he just wants to be friends. I don't know. We haven't confirmed he's mean.
It's
So
true. Just because he's big doesn't mean he's You're right. You're right. We
Well,
shouldn't judge.
And it could be as simple as a Spren. Like it could be not even like a physical thing. It could be a, some sort of massive
high storm Spren.
yeah, spirit like Sprenish creature that like doesn't even affect the world around it.
It could
Who
be
knows?
the Stormfather. Honestly, like
Sure.
Kaladin's seen the Stormfather, so why can't
We've seen. So it talks. If we're talking on this massive scale, which I feel like this is a little bit of it's not a rabbit hole, but whatever. So we've seen the face of the Stormfather in these storms, right?
Yeah.
It just talks about it. Kind of fills the whole sky. What if that's literally just this guy's head? Like that's his body. The Stormfather's
This is
body
the
is
body
this
that
big
goes on that
multi-legged
head.
thing. And like we've just seen him duck down and put his head in front of Kaladin or Dalinar or whoever, right? But the whole body was behind. We just didn't see because he's got this big old head, in front of us. So I'm gonna go ahead and just make the assumption that they're not the same, though. That this is not the Stormfather walking around. But it's interesting.
I think
Go ahead.
I agree with you, Paul. I'm chalking this one up on the whiteboard of numerous questions of what the heck is this? This gets a new entry for me.
Yeah, that's true. I'm the only thing I'm curious about is like why are these always in the high storms? Like I'm almost in the boat that these like the high storm is like an extension of this thing, kind of sort of, or like I don't know, like literally some high storm Spren. Like sounds cheesy, but like literally, I don't, like what I don't know that these things like necessarily hang out in high storms, but that they quite literally like are the embodiment, maybe. Who knows? That's too big of a thing, I guess, for me to try and really speculate on right now. Yeah, interesting.
All right.
I don't know.
Enough of High Storm Spren and Stormfather Kremling leg man and stuff like that. Any closing thoughts on this episode?
I'm curious to see our yellow Spren, our yellow ribbon of light.
Okay.
Yeah, what is Kaladin gonna do next? That's also my I think question out of these chapters is how is resolve with his relationship he's building with the Parshmen?
That is definitely my big question.
So there's a very interesting dynamic here that Kaladin's starting with his storyline here that, in classic Star Wars fashion, before Rogue One was a thing, it's stormtroopers are bad, it's okay to kill stormtroopers because they're bad. And then in modern or more recent Star Wars, it's, well, not all stormtroopers are bad, not everybody's got their own story, so that type of thing. And this is what we're presented with now is, Knights Radiant are good. Void, everybody from the Voidbringers, Parshendi, whatever, are bad. And it's okay to kill Parshendi because they're bad. And that's us and them, as Kaladin says. And as soon as he puts Saw and his daughter in us as I'm going to protect us because I'm a Windrunner, that raises a whole slew of questions for Kaladin, and it's really bothering him moving forward from here. So that's what was my takeaway from this episode.
Yeah, it just got way more complicated.
All right. With that, we can close this episode and read further. Thanks for joining me, Paul and Eliot. See you guys next week.
See ya.
Bye.